BlackRock and the Federal Reserve have just coordinated the movement of $32 trillion in a silent operation that effectively ends the financial system as you know it. And this is not hyperbole. It is a documented ledger entry that signals the final phase of the greatest wealth transfer in human history. While the mainstream media was distracting you with political circus acts and fabricated culture wars, the plumbing of the global financial architecture was being ripped out and replaced in the dark. This $32 trillion figure represents a total liquidity injection and asset swap mechanism that has quietly gone live, moving capital away from the public markets where your 401k lives and into private, impenetrable vaults owned by the sovereign class. You are witnessing the controlled demolition of the American middle class, executed not with a bang, but with a complex series of overnight repurchase agreements and shadow banking ledgers that technically render the US dollar a legacy asset. They haven't just moved money, they have moved the exits. Yes, this is not a theory. This is a mathematical certainty embedded in the flow of funds data that the Federal Reserve publishes but prays you never read. When you see entities like BlackRock pivoting this aggressively, moving this magnitude of capital out of traditional equities and bonds and into what they call real-world assets and private credit, it is the equivalent of the captain of the Titanic quietly securing the only lifeboat while telling the passengers that the iceberg was just a speed bump. They are front-running a liquidity crisis that they know is inevitable because they are the ones who engineered the mathematics behind it. The 32 trillion isn't just a number. It is the sum total of the liquidity that is about to vanish from the retail market, leaving the average investor holding a bag of worthless paper claims while the institutions hold the physical deeds to the earth. The timing of this maneuver is precisely calculated to coincide with the inescapable mathematical end of the debt supercycle we have been living in since 1971. We are currently sitting at the intersection of a sovereign debt crisis and a currency devaluation event that makes 2008 look like a minor market correction. The reason this is happening today is that the United States government can no longer afford the interest on its own debt without printing money at a rate that guarantees hyperinflation. The elites know this. Larry Fink knows this. Jerome Powell knows this. They are not stupid, they are predatory. They understand that the current fiat currency system has reached its terminal velocity. The soft landing narrative they feed you on cable news is a psychological operation designed to keep retail capital in the markets long enough for institutional capital to exit. Consider the retail investor as a passenger in a theater that is currently on fire. The movie is still playing, the actors are still smiling, and the ushers, the financial media, are telling you to stay in your seats because the smoke you smell is just part of the special effects. Meanwhile, the institutional investors, the BlackRocks and Vanguards of the world, quietly locked the side exits and slipped out the back door 30 minutes ago. They are now watching the building burn from across the street, having already insured the structure for double its value. This $32 trillion move is the sound of that back door clicking shut. They are engaging in a massive rotation out of paper wealth, stocks, bonds, fiat currency, and into hard wealth, infrastructure, farmland, energy, and commodities, because they know that when the debt bomb finally detonates, paper burns, but land stays. The trap relies entirely on your normalcy bias. You believe that because the sun rose yesterday and the dollar had value yesterday, it will do so tomorrow. But financial history is punctuated by moments where reality shifts overnight. The laws of economics have been suspended by artificial liquidity for over a decade, creating a distortion field that has blinded the public to the rot underneath. We are seeing the Japanification of the global economy, but on a scale that includes the world's reserve currency. By the time the average person realizes that their savings have been devalued by 50%, the transfer will be complete. The trap is inflation, but not just the price of eggs. It is asset price inflation that puts the ownership of productive assets permanently out of your reach, turning a nation of owners into a nation of renters. To understand the mechanism of this theft, you have to look under the hood at the bond market and the shadow banking system, specifically the derivative exposure that hangs over the global economy like the sword of Damocles. The mechanism they are using involves the rehypothecation of collateral, essentially lending out the same dollar 10 times over to create the illusion of liquidity. This 32 trillion is tied to the notional value of derivatives and the shadow leverage that keeps the banking system solvent on paper. What BlackRock has done is identified that the US Treasury market, the bedrock of the global financial system, is no longer safe. When the risk-free rate becomes the source of risk, the entire pyramid inverts. Think back to 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window. That was a default. It was the US government telling the world, we don't have the gold to pay you, so take this paper instead. We are at the 1971 moment again, but this time there is no paper left to swap. The mechanism now is the transition to a digitized, centralized ledger where they can control the velocity of money directly. The quiet movement of trillions is a repositioning into assets that are immune to the counterparty risk of a failing government. They are buying the inputs of the economy: copper, lithium, water rights, housing developments, using the very cheap debt that they are about to inflate away. It is a brilliant, diabolical strategy. Borrow billions in a currency you know is doomed. Buy real assets that will survive, and then pay back the loan with worthless confetti money. The domino effect here starts with the yield curve control. As the Fed loses control of the long end of the bond market, interest rates will spike, crushing the value of the existing bonds held by banks and pension funds. We saw a preview of this with the Silicon Valley Bank collapse. That wasn't an isolated incident. It was a tremor before the earthquake. The $32 trillion shift is a defensive moat being dug by the elites to protect themselves from the fallout of this bond market collapse. When the bond market breaks, the derivatives market, which is valued in the quadrillions, unravels. This is why they are moving specifically into private credit and private equity. These markets do not mark-to-market daily. They don't have a ticker tape. They can hide the losses and freeze redemptions. When the crash comes, you will try to sell your ETF and find the liquidity is gone, but they will be sitting in private funds that locked the gates months ago. Comparing this to the Great Depression is insufficient because the 1930s was a deflationary collapse against a gold standard. What we are facing is an inflationary collapse in a fiat vacuum. The better comparison is the collapse of the Weimar Republic, but digitized and globalized. The mechanism of printing has evolved. They don't just print cash, they create reserves. This quiet move is essentially a massive swap, where the Fed takes the toxic garbage off the balance sheets of the too-big-to-fail banks and gives them fresh liquidity to go out and buy the world. It is the privatization of profit and the socialization of absolute ruin. The how is simple. They have rigged the game so that they get the new money first, before it causes inflation, buying assets at today's prices. By the time that money circulates down to you, it has caused prices to double. You are paying for their acquisitions through your cost of living. The solution requires you to stop thinking like a consumer and start thinking like a central bank. You must become your own central bank. The only way to survive a wealth transfer of this magnitude is to step out of the path of the avalanche. If they are moving out of paper and into hard assets, you must do the same, but you must do it with agility. The first and most critical step is to minimize your exposure to counterparty risk. If your wealth is purely digits on a screen in a bank that is leveraged 100 to 1, you do not own that money. You are an unsecured creditor to a bankrupt institution. You need to secure assets that have no liability attached to them. Gold and silver are the most obvious, time-tested shields against this specific type of currency debasement. But you have to understand why. It's not just about price go up. It is about the fact that gold is the only financial asset that is not someone else's liability. When BlackRock moves trillions, they are effectively trying to synthesize the stability of gold using a portfolio of real assets. You can just buy the metal. Physical possession is key here. If you hold a paper contract for gold, you are right back in the same theater that is on fire. In a systemic collapse, paper contracts are settled in cash, not metal, and that cash will be worthless. You want the asset that cannot be printed, hacked, or canceled by a government decree. Beyond precious metals, you must look at strategic land and energy. If you cannot afford a farm, look at commodities that are essential for the next phase of civilization. energy, food, and defense. The world is becoming more kinetic, more dangerous. Defense stocks, unfortunately, are a hedge against the geopolitical chaos that always accompanies currency collapses. Look at the companies building the infrastructure of the future, not the consumer tech companies selling gadgets to a broke middle class. You want to own the producers of value, not the consumers of debt. And do not ignore the power of self-custody in the digital realm. If you understand it, Bitcoin offers a lifeboat outside the traditional banking rails, but only if you hold the keys. The ethos is the same, no counterparty risk. This is a time for aggressive defense. The 60-40 portfolio of stocks and bonds is dead because both stocks and bonds are mathematically correlated to the liquidity that is being withdrawn. You need non-correlated assets. You need things that people need regardless of what the currency is worth. Food, water, shelter, energy, protection. This is not about getting rich quick. It is about not becoming poor instantly. The window to position yourself is closing. The 32 trillion has already moved. The smart money has placed its bets. Every day you wait is a day you remain exposed to a system that has already been marked for demolition. There is a hidden rule, a loophole that the elites rely on, which is the legal distinction between a depositor and a secured creditor. In the event of a banking failure under the Dodd-Frank Act and similar laws globally, bailouts are being replaced by bail-ins. This means the bank uses depositor funds, your savings, to recapitalize itself. They legally convert your savings into equity in the failed bank. You become a shareholder in a corpse. The elites know this, which is why their massive capital movements are often structured through special purpose vehicles and trust structures that sit outside the commercial banking layer. They are not depositors, they are owners. To use this to your advantage, you must structure your life to reduce your depositor status. Keep only what you need for monthly expenses in the banking system. Sweep the rest into assets you have direct title to. The secret is legal ownership versus beneficial ownership. Be the legal owner of your assets. The mindset shift you need is to stop looking for gains in dollar terms. If your house doubles in price but the dollar loses half its value, you have gained nothing. Measure your wealth in ounces of gold, in acres of land, in bushels of wheat. That is how the elites measure the 32 trillion they just moved. Do not let the magnitude of this scare you into paralysis. Fear is their tool. Knowledge is yours. The same volatility that destroys the unprepared builds the fortunes of the prepared. The greatest fortunes in history were made during times of chaos, not times of stability. You now know the theater is on fire. You know where the exits are. The crowd is still watching the screen. Stand up, walk to the exit, and secure your future before the rush begins. I'm going to break down the specific sector that BlackRock is betting on most heavily in the next report, because there is one industry that is about to become the new oil, and you can still get in.